Hi guys, and welcome to today's episode. In today's episode, I'm going to show you how to build the two walkthrough exhibits for our two beds that we have in the game, which are the Egyptian fruit bed and the spectacled flying fox, which is the newest exhibit animal in this game from the newest DLC, the Oceania pack. And if you haven't seen the first episode of this series where we started building the night house and also did a habitat for the kiwi, go ahead and check this one out beforehand so you know what we are doing here and what is going on. So let's get started. So as I said, we are continuing with the night house. We are almost finishing the night house too, but I didn't quite manage to finish some like backstage stuff, and the area for the guests is also not 100% complete. So we are not quite finished yet, but the bed enclosures are finished. So that's what you will be seeing me doing here. And of course, as always, I will also teach you what is important for these animals to be housed in a zoo. So since I wanted to do the spectacled flying fox in this habitat or in this video, I also decided to include the Egyptian fruit bed, which is the exhibit animal from the arid animal pack, if I'm correct. And so I decided to put both of these here. And this night house is located in the Oceania area of the zoo, and the Egyptian fruit bed is not an Oceanian animal. So what I decided to do is basically that when you enter the building from the Oceania side, you will come through this door that you saw right at the beginning, where you will right ahead see the kiwi habitat and then the spectacled flying fox. And then you go over, see the fruit bed, and then you can exit the building next to the fruit bed enclosure and then basically go into the next area of the zoo, which will be a rainforest themed area. So the Egyptian fruit bed is a rainforest kind of bed. So yeah, this is basically like a walk through and then you go into the next area. I thought that would be quite fitting, and I thought that only having the spectacled flying fox and the kiwi in the building would be a little bit too less. So I decided to make both beds. And you will only see me doing the flying fox habitat because the fruit bed habitat is very, very similar. I copied a lot of the stuff that I built for the flying fox habitat and just changed it a little bit so it doesn't look too copy pasted. And I also changed a little bit the foliage. Since it is another biome, I decided to use some other plants so that you can really see that there is another biome going on. And also my very first thoughts when I started to plan both of the exhibits was firstly that I will not be doing them as a walkthrough exhibit. They are only as like a normal exhibit where you can look into. This is no problem to do that in your zoos. You just should not connect the path that is inside the walkthrough exhibit with the pathing that is for the guests. Or you could, for example, also use these barriers which the guests cannot pass so that they will not go in there. Because obviously the bats, they could bite, and so that was one of the very reasons to not make it a walkthrough exhibit, and also so that the bats have more of a privacy and are not disturbed by the guests. For the barrier that is in between the beds and the guests, I decided to use glass for the lower part so that the guests have a very nice view of the beds, because fencing always kind of blocks the view a little bit onto the animals. So I wanted to use glass, and also so that the guests do not try to like poke their fingers through the fencing and maybe touch an animal or potentially get bitten, and so that they can get really close to the barrier and have a really nice view. And on the very top, I decided to still use fencing so that the guests can still also hear the bats really well. Since they do some sounds, of course, they are relatively loud. So I wanted to make sure that the guests can also hear them and that the whole building has a very nice ventilation. So I used fencing on the very top part. And talking about the sounds that the bats make, I saw that, or not really saw, but I found out that as soon as you step out of the exhibit, even just a tiny bit, if you're just about out of the barrier, the sound is blocked completely, so you cannot hear the bats outside of the habitat, even though you are not using like a solid barrier. So what I did is to still have the option that the guests can hear the bats outside, and even like I can hear the bats if I'm like outside of the habitat, is that I recorded the sound, or I took a video, of course, with recording the sound. Then I extracted the sound from this video and put it into my documents in the Planet Zoo. As you might know, you can put like pictures and videos, I believe, and music in your own folders to use them, and then use them on these speakers. And I hid some speakers in the corners of the roof so that you can still hear them outside. And I think it came out really well. I just had to turn up the volume quite a lot because it was just really silent or really quiet through the speakers, so I had to like triple the sound in my editing, but I'm still happy with it, to be honest. Now, talking about the needs of the bats, the fruit bat and the spectacled flying fox are actually very similar, since you can put them more or less in one group of bats. Firstly, from the size, the walkthrough exhibit is way big enough for the bats, but just for your information, the exhibit should be at least 8 by 4 times the wingspan of the animals, so that they have enough room to fly. And also you should make sure that inside the exhibit or the habitat there is enough like free flying room for the animals, so that there is not everything like blocked with ropes and trees and stuff hanging from the roof, so that there is still enough of free flying space for them. So that's what I also did here. And I of course use a lot of like ropes, even though they cannot like interact with any of the items that you manually put inside the habitat. They can only interact with the things that come with the walkthrough exhibit itself, which is honestly a little bit sad. And they also just when it comes to their traversable area completely ignore everything that is inside of there, besides the items from the exhibit themselves. So they will straight up fly through the back wall and all of the other things, which is a little bit sad, but honestly you barely can see it because they are flying pretty fast. And I mean, we are in a night house and it is pretty dark in here too, so you can barely see them like flying through any objects or through the back wall. But just for your information, it sadly is what it is. And yeah, and I tried to incorporate the items that I put in there like with the items that come with the exhibit themselves. I just deleted a few of the things that were not quite fitting from the exhibit itself, and I of course covered them with the new like logs from the new Oceania pack, because I of course want to use the new items, and the items from the exhibitors themselves are a little bit ugly because they're just really bare metal, so not really interesting. So I used the logs to cover them up a little bit, and I also used some ropes to make it look a little bit more interesting and in a way that you would think that they are like connected to one another. Of course, also used some other logs that I put out there, and I also used the sun shade pole. I believe it is a base game item, but I might be wrong, and basically hit this pole inside of the log, so I only have the little connection thingy to connect the rope onto there. And what is also important, what you can see right now, is that I also put a really low like log on the ground with some rope around it, because if a bed should fall down onto the ground for whatever reason, they cannot like fly from the ground up, so they need some sort of an option to climb back up, so that they can then start flying from an elevated position. So I made sure to have some options for the beds where they can climb onto. So I used these low logs, covered them with rope so that there is enough like room for the beds to grasp on and then climb onto, and also connected a rope that is connected with a higher log so that they could also climb up firstly like very high before they start flying. So that is also really important if you want to go for a realistic attempt. And also, if they should actually fall down, it is important that the flooring is not too hard. So you saw me right at the beginning that I first had this like solid floor. I later deleted it because it would be too hard for the beds if they would fall down onto it and probably hurt themselves. So what I did is I used the enrichment item from the habitat tab, which is like this feeding thingy. I don't even know what it is called right now. This is the thing, I mean, you will see it, that I also use in the kiwi habitat, and I use two of them inside of the habitat because I really like the texture of them, and I didn't want to use like only the mulch from the nature tab because it is just very like plain soil and not really interesting looking. So I used these enrichment items and then covered the gaps in between them with the mulch from the nature tab, and then I use various items like little rocks and pebbles and branches and leaf litter to cover up the edges of the enrichment item so it looks more neatly. And I'm really happy with the result, since I couldn't raise the like ground level underneath the exhibit. So I think I came up with a pretty neat idea. Of course they don't use it, but it is just for the looks, and it has also a really nice texture to it. Important items for the beds themselves are of course some sort of ropes. You could use, for example, thick marine ropes, so that the beds can hang onto them and climb onto them. And to also use some natural foliage, which I did on the like back walls. These are of course again the walls by Caesar Crates. I just use them over and over again. You should know that by now. And to also have some sort of tree in there. It was advised in the best practice guideline that I read to use, for example, an eucalyptus tree. but the eucalyptus trees that we have in the game are ginormous. So I had to come up with something else, and I used this tree with the white bark, which is just the very, very small tree, and I use multiple of them and kind of stack them onto one another to make it a little more bigger, because the next size would have been way too big for the habitat. And the trees are, of course, important for the animals to like climb into and sleep in there, because it just resembles their natural behavior really well. And also the different heights of the elements where the beds can hang on are also important for the beds, for their like social structure, and to possibly avoid specific individuals. So that is also important to keep in mind, and to have a like wire mesh roof, so that the beds can also hang on the roof, of course. And the wire mesh roof, of course, also separates the animals from the lights that we have on the roof. I, of course, use different lighting, like the blue light, which would be on at daytime when it is like reversed for the bed, so they think that it is nighttime. And I read that blue light is recommended for beds in night houses, because it kind of resembles the moonlight, and it also doesn't change the color for or of the beds themselves, so that they look, or that the guests can really see the natural color of the beds. And what I also did is to hang some different kind of branches onto the roof, so that the beds have also different kinds of things to hang onto and to climb on, and of course also different textures. It is also important for them so that they can wear down their nails, so that the staff does not need to manually clip the nails, which of course would also be kind of stressful for the animals. So by using different kind of textures for the beds to hang onto or climb onto, you can prevent a vet visit for the beds, basically. And the beds, of course, do not need to technically be in a night house. That they are not entirely just nocturnal. They are also active at daytime, or like at dusk and dawn. So you could technically also have them in an outside habitat. But for this zoo, I decided to make it in the night house, because it just fits into the theme. And of course, the zoo is in a temperate biome, so for the most part of the year it would be too cold for the animals outside. You could, of course, use heating lamps so that the beds can heat up themselves in the cold, but of course, if it would be way too cold, like in the winter time, they should be kept inside, because they just need relatively high temperatures. So if you decide to use an outside habitat, you can put down some heating lamps for them. And what is also important for outside habitats is that around 30% of the habitat is with some solid coverage, for example glass or any like concrete or any other solid wall, and that around 30% of the walls and the roof are just open wire mesh. And that the rest 40% are also open wire mesh, but covered with some, for example, cloth to give the beds some shading and protection from the sun and from rain. And here I am starting with the backstage area, or for the fencing for the backstage area. As I said at the very beginning, I didn't manage to finish the whole backstage area. So you will see me do the area for the beds that are like not visible for the guests, so that they can retreat from the guests, and so that this area could also potentially be separated in case there are like sick animals or anything like this. So I made these custom fences, and then I just basically, as you have might seen, the like front 2/3 of the walkthrough exhibit are the like real exhibit that you can see, and then the back 1/3 of the exhibit is basically the backstage area for the beds. And I also kept the backstage area really simple. So it is easy to clean. I used a concrete floor this time, and I also put it at a slight angle with some vents at the very end so that it is easy to spray down and to clean and keep it clean. And then I just have the normal items that are in the exhibit themselves. And left them in the backstage area, and I also included a dead tree with some ropes to add just a little bit more texture and a little more climbing opportunity for the beds. And of course I again made sure to have something that is close to the ground so that the beds can climb back up in case they should fall down. And later off camera, I also included a ventilation system so that the temperature is always correct inside of this night house, so it always nice and cozy warm for the beds, and to also have always fresh air inside of the building, because the smell can get pretty strong due to the beds because of the feces simply. So it is important to have a very good ventilation inside, so not only for the beds that they are not always like in a stinky habitat, but also of course for the guests. It wouldn't be really fun to be in a night house if it is just extremely smelly. So that's what I did at the very end, of course. And since we didn't quite finish the whole building, basically everything that is outside of the habitats is not entirely finished. I planned to maybe do like a little extra episode in the next few days, possibly before the very next normal episode. I might do like a little walkthrough of the night house to show you everything. So let me know in the comments what you think about this idea to have this little walkthrough where I will show you all like the guest areas and also how I decorated the backstage area, because I also planned to have backstage cages for the beds if they should be injured. It is important for injured beds that they are held in a relatively small cage so that they do not fly. I think this is self-explanatory. If they have, for example, a broken foot or a broken wing, you don't want them to fly too much. So yeah, I will build some custom cages for them that are really small, that are in this little backstage area that you can see in this very long hallway. It looks a little bit empty right now, and also at the very beginning in the cinematic shot you saw that I already started to decorate it, but it is still extremely empty and I just need to figure it out, and then I will show you everything. And of course I will also upload the whole night house to the Steam workshop once it is finished, and I will potentially announce it then in the little walkthrough episode that I will hopefully can put out in the next days. And we are almost at the end of this episode. I hope you enjoyed it and that you like my habitats for the both beds that we have in the game. Don't forget to like and leave a comment. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do so if you don't want to miss any more episodes and want to be part of the journey of this zoo. Have fun with the cinematics at the very end where I will show you the habitat, of course in the night light, or that light that would be on at our daytime so that the beds think that it is night, and also of course with normal daylight so that you can simply really see all the details that we have in the side of this habitat. I hope to see you in the next episode, and until then, bye guys!